Can fasting really save your life? Modern humans evolved in an environment of scarcity. In order for our genes to survive, they had to ensure that our brains directed our bodies to get enough to eat and to reproduce. When the body engages in behaviors that favor survival and reproduction, including eating and sex, the brain rewards the body with the release of dopamine, the neurochemical associated with pleasure. The more dopamine, the more intense the pleasure. For 200,000 years of modern human existence, this drive for pleasure helped to ensure that humans got enough to eat and successfully reproduced. The system worked because prior to the Industrial Revolution, 200 years ago, humans struggled to get enough to eat and rarely got too much. Human beings survived and thrived through innovation, driven by the relentless search for increased pleasure. We even discovered how to artificially enhance the release of dopamine with chemicals like drugs and alcohol. And during the Industrial Revolution, we began to transform our diet from whole natural foods to ultra-processed foods. This dramatically increased the caloric density of food and the pleasure of eating, thanks to the addition of increasing amounts of salt, oil, and sugar. Salt, oil, and sugar make processed foods taste better than whole foods because their consumption results in greatly increased release of dopamine, creating a pleasure trap. This enhanced food is unnaturally and intensely more appealing. It makes whole foods less appealing by comparison, to the point of overriding our natural satiety mechanisms. The increasing use of ultra-processed foods saturated with salt, oil, and sugar has resulted in an epidemic rise in the incidence of obesity. Modern humans have transformed their bodies, dramatically increasing the amount of fat in general and visceral fat in particular. Visceral fat, found predominantly around the abdominal organs, is hypertrophic, hyperplastic, and hypermetabolic. It functions like a tumor, and its rise is correlated with our epidemic of cardiovascular disease, diabetes, autoimmune disease, and cancer. In the United States, here is a map depicting the self-reported levels of obesity, with 35% obesity saturation in the western part of the country and 45% saturation in the east. And these actually underreport obesity by as much as 40%, as they are self-reported and people lie, always claiming they are thinner than they are, never claiming they're fatter than they are. The only place in the United States with obesity less than 25% saturation is Washington, D.C., which means the people that live in Washington, D.C. are either the smallest overeaters or the biggest liars. Once caught in the dietary pleasure trap, it's extremely unlikely an individual will ever escape. Like drug addicts and alcoholics, they fail recovery programs over 90% of the time. The likelihood of an individual with a BMI over 30 successfully achieving and maintaining weight loss is about 1%. That means there's a 99% of people failing using available weight loss strategies. These strategies involve attempting to eat smaller amounts of hyperpalatable foods, which is similar to alcoholics trying to treat their alcoholism by drinking less or switching to just drinking beer or wine. For 200,000 years of modern human existence, people ate whole natural foods. And for 200 years, we've been switching to ultra-processed foods. If you look very carefully, you might be able to spot the difference. The result is we squander our resources by treating the leading causes of death, including heart disease, diabetes, and cancer, rather than dealing with the actual causes of death, the reason people develop heart disease, diabetes, and cancer in the first place. If dieting using hyperpalatable foods doesn't work, what does? How can people neuroadapt their taste mechanisms and allow whole foods to become appealing? An ancient practice that's been shown to be safe and effective at helping people make this transition is called fasting. Fasting is the complete abstinence from all substances except pure water in an environment of rest. As you can see, and as you can imagine, after eating nothing for days or weeks, even the simplest whole fruits and vegetables become quite appealing. In addition to facilitating the switch from hyperpalatable foods to whole foods, fasting preferentially mobilizes visceral fat and reverses many diseases of dietary excess, including high blood pressure, diabetes, autoimmune disease, and lymphoma. These leading causes of death and disability are often treated as independent and unrelated conditions. You have to go to different types of doctors in order to be diagnosed and treated. However, they are all associated with the inflammation that results from maintaining excess visceral fat. The key biological adaptation to fasting involves the conversion of our biggest user of glucose, the brain, to burning fat. This adaptation allows humans to go without food for up to 70 days prior to entering starvation. Researchers at the True North Health Foundation completed a comprehensive fasting safety study that was published in the BMC in 2018, demonstrating that fasting can be done safely. This protocol has been used at the True North Health Center for over 40 years, with 25,000 consecutive patients without any deaths. In a peer-reviewed journal published in the IJDRP in 2021, we documented that fasting around 2 weeks, patients lost about 9% of their total body weight, 18% of their total fat, and almost 40% of their visceral fat. Only 6% of lean tissue was lost, and at 6-week follow-up, the percentage of lean mass was higher than at baseline, but the fat continued to be mobilized. Proposed mechanisms for the effectiveness of fasting include weight loss, natriuresis, detoxification, especially of fat-soluble toxins, enzymatic induction of detoxifying and micronutrient pathways, improved insulin sensitivity, gut leakage reduction through the healing of tight junctions, normalized autonomic nervous system tone, immune system enhancement, including increased autophagy, taste neuroadaptation that allows whole foods to become more appealing, psychospiritual fulfillment. It's interesting to note that the Jews and the Jains, the Hindus, Muslims, Buddhists, and Christians don't agree on everything, but they all have a tradition and a deep respect for fasting. Some biomarkers increase during fasting, including adenopectin, ghrelin, and AMPK. These increases are tied to improved insulin sensitivity and reduced inflammation, as well as increased mitochondrial biogenesis, the production of the energy-producing components inside our cells. Beta-hydroxybutyrate, or BHB, becomes the main fuel of the brain during fasting, and this increases a chemical called brain-derived neurotrophic factor, or BDNF, which protects the brain from the inflammation associated with the development of Alzheimer's disease. Insulin sensitivity normalizes, correcting diabetes. Gut microbiome diversity changes equated analogously to the rebooting of the corrupted hard drive of a memory of a computer. Gut microbiome diversity changes are equated analogously to rebooting the corrupted memory of a computer. Increases in sirtuins promote longevity, and cellular stress resistance and adaptation make cancer cells more vulnerable to chemotherapy, and increases in autophagy enhance the immune system's ability to eliminate cancer cells. According to Walter Longo in the Journal of Metabolism in 2015, the combination of fasting and chemotherapy results in dramatically higher cancer-free survival than chemotherapy alone. Some biomarkers decrease with fasting, and those include glucose, insulin, leptin, and IGF-1. Blood pressure, heart rate, and mTOR go down in fasting, and lower mTOR equates to increased autophagy. Biomarkers associated with oxidation, inflammation, and metabolic syndrome all reduce during fasting. Conditions favorable to fasting are often associated with dietary excess and include high blood pressure, the leading contributing cause of death and disability, which responds remarkably well to fasting. In a retrospective analysis of 174 patients, all patients reduced blood pressure sufficiently to eliminate the need for medication. In a prospective study of 27 patients fasting for an average of 2 weeks, 26 were able to normalize their blood pressure entirely at 6-week follow-up. And at 1 year, 76% of the patients weighed less than at baseline. The majority had maintained normal blood pressure and without the use of medication. Autoimmune diseases, including psoriasis, also respond to fasting. This patient with a 22-year history of plaque psoriasis experienced a remarkable resolution in just 2 weeks of fasting and eliminated the use of medications entirely. This patient with a progressive 2-year history of follicular lymphoma, stage 3, confirmed by excisional biopsy, experienced dramatic relief with 3 weeks of fasting, and CT scan demonstrated significant reduction in tumor size. In the British Medical Journal case reports, we reported 3-year and 10-year follow-ups showing complete cancer remission while eating a whole plant foods diet. A case series of patients with follicular lymphoma completed this year suggests that these results are not isolated or even unusual. This patient had tremendous progress with an initial 21-day fast, followed by a subsequent fast lasting 39 days. In the last few years, we've been treating increasing numbers of patients experiencing residual symptoms associated with infection or vaccination for COVID-19. This patient documented the recovery from long COVID in a 72-year-old male with a 2-year history of symptoms, including brain fog, fatigue, etc., after 14 days of fasting. We also recently published a case involving a long-standing vegan with elevated lipoprotein (a) that reduced over 40% following just 10 days of fasting. Lipoprotein (a) is a sensitive biomarker for cardiovascular disease that up until now was thought to be untreatable. To ensure a safe and effective fasting experience, it's important to have a medical history review, a physical exam, and appropriate lab testing to ensure that someone is a good candidate for fasting. Appropriate monitoring must be provided to prevent dehydration and depletion, and careful refeeding is needed to avoid post-fasting edema or potentially fatal refeeding syndrome. At the True North Health Center, we recommend an exclusively whole plant food diet free of drugs, salt, oil, and sugar in the days before and indefinitely after fasting. If you're struggling with the consequences of dietary excess, perhaps fasting can save your life. I'd like to congratulate Dr. Pramod and all of the people that have participated in the Freedom from Diabetes Research Foundations for their outstanding achievements, and I wish you the best of luck in maintaining long-term adherence.